Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast daily. I'm Bill Landis. That's Jeremy Birmingham. We appreciate you starting your week with us here on the podcast after a tough loss for Ohio State over the weekend. I'm sure people aren't particularly interested in keeping to rehash it, but we're here, we're talking about it. Berm, we're not going to do a rewatch because I don't think anyone wants that right now. So I'm just going to ask you this: we're recording this, 30-ish hours after the game happened. We've gotten back to our lives, spent some time around our families, a little time to digest, a little time to decompress. How you feeling?
I went and saw The Little Mermaid on Sunday afternoon, as opposed to my other option was watching the Bengals, and I kept up to date on their progress while I was at the Croswell Theater in Adrian, Michigan, the oldest, opera house / theater in Michigan. And they did exactly what I thought they would do. So I was glad I didn't watch that game. But then when I got home after had dinner, sat down and watched the end of the Eagles game, and I thought to myself, Bill's real lucky. He doesn't have to root for anything in Ohio. Because it's not always fun. No, honestly, it is, and this is going to sound in some way like I'm trying to be holier than thou or priestly or whatever. The last couple of years have had so many real life losses that I can't really allow myself to get worked up about a football game to the degree that I used to. Now, that said, I'm interested in doing a rewatch of the Ohio State Michigan game next Sunday night if Texas loses and Florida State loses and Ohio State finds a way to sneak into the playoffs. So if that happens, I think we can then maybe look back at this game over the weekend and dive into the minutia of it and see if we can figure out exactly where things went right or where things went wrong. But in the big picture of things, that doesn't really matter as we head into Monday morning. What we have to think about now for Ohio State is where do they go from here? What's next? And, looking back at the Michigan game would not make any sense right now, because if Ohio State doesn't get the help it needs to get into the playoff, 60% of the starters on this team won't be playing a football game for Ohio State again. And so then who cares what happens? Because, I think that the Orange Bowl or wherever they end up will be a fine game. It'll be a fun opportunity for some young guys to get their first reps. I hope for Brandon Innes' sake and some guys like that, they get a chance to do that in South Florida. It'd be good for them to get home and have that opportunity. But Ohio State needs a lot of help to get to the playoff, and we can talk about the games, I guess, once we figure that out. But it's more about the big picture of where things go for Ryan Day and for the program. And to do that without losing sight of the fact that it is clear Ohio State is one of the top 4 or 5 programs in the country, and they have to fix a few things to make sure that they have a shot to win a national championship next year.
So I agree with you, right? Well, it does feel like we're kind of in the off-season mode, and obviously we'll recalibrate if and when we have to, but we're not there quite yet. So I think it is okay to kind of have more of an eye toward the future. So I guess with that in mind, when you think about next steps, bigger picture, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you as you think about what Ohio State might need to address to, I don't even know how to put it, take that next step forward, make sure it's in the right form it needs to be. And it's not like it needs a reset, right? They're like you said, they're still one of the top 5 programs in the country, but clearly there are things that need to be addressed. So when you think about those things, where does your mind go first?
I think it's about Ryan Day figuring out what type of leader he wants to be, and maybe making some tough decisions. We talked about it on Snap Judgments. I'm sure you and Doug talked about it on the post game as well, about some coaching shuffling that needs to happen. You have to make sure James Laurinaitis stays on your staff. That's rule number 1 for me. And to do that means somebody else has to go. And I think everyone has a fairly good idea of what the most likely course of action is for Ohio State. Saturday was another reminder that the special teams play has just not been good enough. It's not meant to be a knock on Parker Fleming, who I genuinely like him. I just don't know if you have to choose between what you're getting now and in the future out of James Laurinaitis versus what you're getting now and in the future versus Parker Fleming. I don't think there's a reasonable discussion to be had for any other outcome other than that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. We did talk about that some on the live show that Doug and I did on Sunday, which does have a little more game rehash if people are looking for that, and certainly Snap Judgments and the post game show we did has that too if you are someone who's looking for it. But yeah, I think that's the obvious step in terms of staff stuff, right? And that move, because I think everybody agrees that James Laurinaitis should probably be a full-time staff member for this team. When you think about that move and the impact of it, do you think about more like on-field stuff, or like the impact it could have on roster building, recruiting, or even like the intangible stuff of like what it takes to win in the Michigan game too? Like what do you think is most important there when you consider that move?
I think more about recruiting, obviously, to start, but I do think that there is some value in having guys that have played in this rivalry and played in the Big Ten. And James Laurinaitis, watching the game on Saturday from the field, I like to just look at the sideline, see who's doing what. And the only coach that I really saw constantly in the face of players, the only coach I saw that was constantly grabbing guys by their jerseys and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, is James Laurinaitis. And I think you need that. College football is so different now. And it's not a knock on anybody who's lived the old school way, but you have to have these young coaches that understand how to connect with the players. And James Laurinaitis does that. Obviously, as a recruiter, he's got a potential to be elite. I'm not going to stand here and say that I think that the linebacker play was markedly better than a year ago with James Laurinaitis as the de facto position coach. I think we can actually probably agree that maybe it was a step backwards, but some of that is because they were asked to do different things. Some of that is because there always has to be a weak spot in the defense, and the defensive line and the safeties were better, and so the linebackers, I guess, by default became the third best level of the defense. But I also think that it's important to grasp that Steel Chambers is still a running back turned linebacker 2 years ago. And Tommy Eichenberg played pretty much all last year with broken thumbs. And this year, towards the end, I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have played on Saturday because he didn't look himself and certainly didn't appear to be able to be as physical as he wanted to be. And I guess that leads into my second point of something that has to be done this offseason. Let's make this an open letter to Ryan Day, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
We have to know what's going on with injuries. Like, we have to know what's actually happening so that we can be fair in the way that we evaluate and assess these players. And I know that the coaching staff and the inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center doesn't give two craps about what we think. But when we are trying to tell the story of the team, it becomes nearly impossible to tell when we don't have any idea what's really going on with these kids. And that's a shame, because I think it does tinge the way people view players like Tommy Eichenberg at the end of his career at Ohio State, which obviously didn't go the way that anyone would have wanted. But I don't know if he was healthy enough to play, and because we don't know what actually happened to him in the Rutgers game.
Yeah, it's tough. You try to keep it in mind too. Like, I think he clearly was not himself. I don't know if like Mike Hall was coming off an injury. I thought Mike Hall might have played his best game of the year. So like there's stuff like that too. So, but I think it's fair to everybody if we can have a better idea of what's going on, just so we can talk about it fairly. So I'm in agreement with you. That's something I would like to see changed. I'm not optimistic that it's going to change, but I would like to. I want to circle back to what you said about James Laurinaitis' potential impact there, and like having guys around that have been in the Michigan game, played in the Big Ten, like have a deeper understanding of the history here and the importance of it. Is there anything else in your mind that can be done besides like bringing more people like that into the program that can maybe get Ohio State in a better place in this rivalry than where it is right now? Because I do feel like, again, as someone who's like, I'm not an Ohioan, right? I've been covering Ohio State for a decade. I like to think I have a grasp of what it means to people, but I would never actually pretend to know that because I didn't grow up with it. But I understand the importance of it. And to me, like, those intangible things seem like they matter a tremendous amount. And it just feels like Ohio State's missing some of them, but I don't know. I don't know how they get it back, because like a guy from New Hampshire, like trying to do it almost like would feel inorganic too. So are there things that could be done, you think, that could help in that way?
I don't know. I may draw some fire here from people. Like, I think Ryan Day gets it. I don't think Ryan Day doesn't understand the rivalry. I want to be very, like, Ryan Day's children have lived in Ohio for 7 years now. Okay. Like, he's raising his kids in Central Ohio. His family's been in Central Ohio for 7 years. That's almost now a quarter of his life. Like, he gets what this rivalry is about. Does that mean that maybe his style doesn't lend to quite the obsessiveness about this rivalry that Urban Meyers did and Jim Tressel did? Of course. I mean, that again is the evolution of football and coaches that are younger and having a different approach. Now, something about this approach isn't working. I don't know if you need more assistance. Like, I'm just going to say this, and this is not me advocating for firings and wholesale staff changes and that sort of stuff. Okay. If I had to choose right now between JT Barrett as my quarterback's coach and Corey Dennis as my quarterback's coach, I probably pick JT Barrett. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that.
It's like JT, like number one, Corey Dennis and his hands-on approach with the quarterbacks is not really a part of this puzzle, right? Because Ryan Day is the quarterback's coach. I do think that having a guy that played quarterback, especially understanding the Big Ten, would be pivotal for a player like Kyle McCord, who's trying to develop and become a better player. Ryan Day cannot be the full-time quarterbacks coach and the full-time head coach at Ohio State. And that is in many ways what he's been in the last couple of years. Now, when you have generational players like CJ Stroud and Justin Fields, that's well and good. When you have a guy who actually needs hands-on development and intrinsic work to be done, I don't think it's fair to expect Ryan Day to do that. Now, whose fault is that? It's Ryan Day's, right? He's the guy that promoted and wanted to keep Corey Dennis there. He wanted to keep Corey Dennis there because Corey Dennis will coach things the way Ryan Day wants. I think JT Barrett would do the same thing. And he was I'm going to tell you what, Bill, I was watching on Saturday night. It's the end of the first quarter, Florida State, and they brought Tim Tebow on to have a conversation on the sideline. He was honored pregame for something at Florida. And I sat there watching and listening to Tim Tebow talk about how much he loved Florida and how much it meant to him to play football, and not just for the Gators, but play football in general, and how much the game meant to him. And I was like, damn, I want to run through a brick wall sitting on my couch. And then I thought about the post game in Ann Arbor on Saturday and how maybe you get laughed at it. Maybe it's not 2008 and people will clown on you for showing up with emotion. I think the two times that the Ryan Day has really connected with the Ohio State fan base, the guy that people are like, damn, that's my coach and I'm supporting him, were the Georgia game last year and after the Notre Dame game this year, because people saw him care. And I know, because we do have the benefit of having an actual relationship with Ryan Day and getting to talk to him and know him as a person a little bit. That guy cares a lot. Mm-hmm. But I think at some point you have to stop being concerned about letting that show. Like, let it out. People want that. This is 2023. I want to know that the coach feels it as much as the people who are at home watching it do. And there's been a very few times when Day takes that approach and people respond to it very positively. I think he needs to just let it go and be himself. And I don't know that he's always doing that. And I think that's because he feels like maybe he doesn't belong because he's not from Ohio. And I think he's trying to constantly prove that. But the times when he's actually just sort of exposed himself, that's when people have responded the most affirmatively.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do think it's probably difficult, right, to figure out exactly how to handle that, because I don't think, like, it's what you said earlier, right? It's not that he doesn't understand the importance of Ohio State, Michigan. Of course he does. Understanding it and then channeling those emotions the right way to get the best out of your team, I think, are two very different things. And the second part, I think, is what he's struggled with. Like, how is he supposed to set the example for his team going into that game? And it's kind of weird. Like, last year, I thought maybe he was a little too tight and his team played that way. And then, I don't know, like, going into this game, I didn't sense any tightness, but I also sensed just like kind of like an utter lack of emotion in general, right? And I think there's probably somewhere in between where he needs to land to get this team into the right frame of mind. And I do think he's capable of it because we've seen it. It's just like I don't know why he was able to channel it in a couple, like the Notre Dame game and the Georgia game, and he hasn't been able to quite do it in this game. That disconnect is what's a little weird to me.
I think he wasn't able to because he's lost to Michigan the last 2 years before this one. And he didn't want to say something that could be construed as a bulletin board material. There were so many things happening in the last few weeks that Ryan Day could have stepped up and been demonstrative about and said, hey, this is wrong. Instead, it's always like, oh, we're just going to play it cool. Like, people don't want that. Don't worry about playing it cool. Play it like you feel, and people will respond to that. He is an extremely competitive person, like to the level that people sometimes, oh, he's not like Urban Meyer, doesn't have that. Yes, he does. He does have that. he just doesn't want to show it all the time. And I think it's because he wants to be viewed as very under controlled leader. And maybe that's because he hasn't won the national championship or gotten something where he feels like he's earned the right to step up. Like, you're the head coach at Ohio State. You are the person that everyone in the country is going to listen to when you talk about an issue. If you step up and say, hey, what they've been doing is flat out wrong and it shouldn't be happening, people will respond. Yeah, you'll have Michigan fans say you're a crybaby. Who cares? Like, that's part of the sport. You have the occasional national media writer say, oh, you shouldn't say this. But who cares? Like, people will respond to it. Just go out there and let it rip. And I mean that in the way of Ryan Day as a head coach letting it rip. I mean, as a play caller letting it rip. I mean, on the field letting your emotions go. Be that guy. Like, that's when people like it. That's when people respond. And I think it's what this team desperately needs. I said it at the start of the year. I felt like there was not a leader who was going to go out there and just put the team on their back and say, I'm doing this with or without you guys. And that was something I worried about preseason. It's something that I felt on Saturday watching. And kudos to Kyle McCord for sitting down in front of the media in Ann Arbor and talking. Mm-hmm. Caleb Williams didn't do that a week ago after the UCLA game. He didn't have to do that. And people don't really, I think, understand that. Kyle McCord is a junior in college. He doesn't have to sit there and take those shots, but he is. But I don't know. Do you think people wanted to hear Kyle McCord say, oh, we tried our best? Or do you think people would have responded better if he said, this is never going to happen again?
Yeah, the latter, right? I think passion in general, which is just like, and then Kyle saying like it's what did he say? People misconstrued it as him saying I think it's just a game. I think what he actually said is like it's a football game, as like leading into the week as a way of saying like don't let your emotions run too high. I don't know. I kind of think you can let your emotions run high in a game like that. Like the being tight and playing emotional, I think are two different things. And as long as
here's another, I don't mean to interrupt. This is an important, I think, anecdote from on the field pregame, because you guys weren't allowed down there, so you didn't see this. Yeah. So, team comes out and they're getting ready to go to do the quarterback warm-ups and that sort of stuff. And Kyle McCord, like he has all year, gets in the huddle and starts to give a speech. Right, you give his heart and soul to the team. And what he said over and over, I think he said it 4 times. No mistakes. Do not make mistakes. Do not make mistakes. And I was like, and I was sitting there talking to our friend Adam King, and I said, man, I kind of wish they just say, let's go out there and rip, do our best. Like when the idea is don't make mistakes, like that like idea of don't be tight. Like I don't know that it was, or that they were too loose. Like obviously someone was feeling some pressure. And I turned to Adam and I said, it's unfortunate the guy who's going to have the ball in his hands most of the game and is most likely to make the mistake is saying, don't make mistakes. And it just like, there's a lacking confidence from the quarterback. And that goes back to my initial point, I guess, about like, there's other staff changes that I think could be made that are beneficial for this program. And JT Barrett's coaching with the Detroit Lions and doing pretty well with the quarterbacks up there. So I think it's time to make that call.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, and maybe this can be our last point here. When you think about where this rivalry is and the separation is probably not the right word, but the thing that is keeping Ohio State from winning these games, and maybe we can just focus on this one because as far as we know, there weren't any extracurriculars that aided Michigan in this game. Is it more football stuff or is it more like intangible emotion stuff that is the difference between winning and losing for Ohio State right now?
I think it's intangible emotion stuff.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, you lost this game on Saturday because you made mistakes and Michigan didn't. I mean, I think there has to be a real conversation about that. I mean, you lose by 6 points, you give away 3 points at the end of the half by elite, even if you get 10 more yards, you still maybe kick a field goal and maybe you miss it, but at least that it's in the purview of reality. If you're kicking a 42-yarder instead of a 52-yarder, you give them 7 points in the first quarter on an interception. And whether or not Ohio State should have given up Michigan's second touchdown, I personally don't think that was anything other than an interception. Mm-hmm. But I don't think from the start of the game, after Ohio State went 3-and-out on the first drive, Michigan goes 3-and-out. It's kind of, pregame keys. I said first couple drives are going to be these teams feeling each other out, and it's exactly what happened. And then Kyle McCord made a critical mistake. Michigan scored, and from that point forward, like the Ohio State team was just meh. They were just like tight from that moment forward. I thought Ryan Day called a great game offensively. I thought that the offense, if it executes at the level it should and the level Ryan Day expects and the level we've seen in the last few years, I think Ohio State wins that game. I don't think there's anything wrong. Like I've had people ask out on the board at OhioState.rivals.com, should Ryan Day give up play calling? Like, I don't think this had anything to do with that. I think even going up into halftime, Ohio State down 14-10, no one said a word. No one said a word walking up that tunnel except for Jack Sawyer, who turned. He was one of the last people in the locker room and said, guys, we're going to win this game. Like no one else said a word. And that sort of tightness, that sort of lack of confidence was shocking to me. And I think that comes because they felt the coaching staff playing tight and calling it tight at that moment. And if you have these athletes, you have this caliber of player on your team, you have to just go out there and say, guys, we are better than them, and we are going to give you every chance to win. And I just don't think that the guys on the team felt like they were given that opportunity on Saturday.
Yeah, I think there was something. So this is not a direct quote, I guess, but this is from Nick Baumgartner, who we've had on the show a few times. He's a former Michigan writer, was at the game on Saturday, and he tweeted this out. Sharon Moore said something along the lines of, quote, kids come here to let it rip in this game. If we're not giving them that shot, what are we even doing? Ohio State needs to have that approach too, I think.
I think that Ryan Day would probably argue that he did. But I don't know that. I mean, I don't think he should argue that. But he clearly is speaking post game, which I didn't get to see because I was stuck on the field because the security wouldn't let media members go back up to the tunnel for some reason. So I missed the entire post game. But he seemed very content with the field goal opportunity. Now, I think this is because Ryan Day, for the first time in his career, was confident enough in his defense that he felt like, hey, if we miss this, big deal. And the Buckeyes did. They came out, they tied the game up. I said on Snap Judgments, but I thought that the Ohio State touchdown drive with the second drive of the second half was like the best drive I've seen from Ohio State all year. I mean, it was their best
drive of the season. Yeah,
they were like, okay, we're not going to. And then the defense let them down. I don't know. Like the Sharon Moore quote is spot on. I don't know that I think that Ryan Day was in the wrong for the way he called the game. Like I can argue.
Yeah.
I think you can argue the point that they should have maybe gone for it or tried to get further into the closing the half out and trying to get more yards. I don't disagree with punting on the 4th and 2 from their own 46-yard line on the second drive of the game. I disagree with the fact that you have a punter who can't kick it more than 35 yards, apparently. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then go for it. I don't think that going for it in itself was a bad decision. I think if I have a coach who I want to say, what are you doing? It was Jim Knowles on Saturday. Like, why did you blitz 4 times? Why did you not try to get after JJ McCarthy? Like he had 4 incompletions, and I think all 4 of them were when you blitzed. So why not go after the kid? Like, why not go at him? And this is where I think the last 2 years does still play some role in the psyche for Ohio State, because those moments where you're like, oh, did they catch us because we were cheating or because they were cheating or because they just knew what we were doing? Because I think Jim Knowles, as conservative as he played it all year, like I thought he missed a major opportunity on Saturday by just letting Michigan go for 4 yards a carry and not trying to throw them off their rhythm.
Yeah, I think there's possibly an overcorrection there for Jim Knowles. 4 blitzes is probably not enough, especially when your defensive line is not really getting after it. But I think like the idea of like let it rip, right? I don't think that's merely play, or it's not the decision of the play, right? It's what message that sends to your players, I think. Yeah. And it's like, are you creating an environment where your players feel empowered to like play fast, probably play with like a little bit of reckless abandon, like play with your hair on fire in a game like that? And I don't know that either guy who was calling the plays for Ohio State did that well enough against Michigan. I think Michigan's coaches probably did that better on both sides of the ball than Ohio State's did. And I kind of feel like that's been the case for the last 3 years. It's not like, it's not like I disagree with this specific play call on 3rd and 5, because I kind of agree with you that like Ryan Day did seem to have a good plan, but there are moments that arise in a game where I think you can send your team a message one way or the other. And I don't know really if the right message was sent at any point other than probably on that one drive where it was clear that Michigan's defense was worn down, and Ohio State had something going with the run game, and Ryan Day just leaned on it and pushed him into the end zone. But aside from that, I thought maybe there were some missed opportunities to like maybe flip the momentum or like the emotion of the game truly in Ohio State's favor.
Yeah, and this is probably a byproduct of being a, and I say this and people will, he's not young. He's in the 5th year. He's a veteran head coach now, but you're still learning. And I think it's about learning how and who you can trust. And something doesn't feel like, I don't know if it's not having Kevin Wilson's voice there. I've tried to talk about that a few times through the season, and it hasn't really, like, I just don't think there's another voice on the offense that Ryan Day trusts. And I don't know why that is. I think it's closer to trusting like Justin Fry. I don't think we saw any real impact of Brian Hartline as an offensive coordinator, and that's fine. He's still learning how to in that role. But is there somebody in Ryan Day's ear pushing back? Is there somebody in his ear saying, Coach, are you sure this is what you want to do? Coach, let's think about this. And I don't know that you have that guy right now. And some of this is because the entire offensive staff outside of Tony Alford is like younger than Ryan Day, which Ryan Day's 44 years old. He's one of the younger head coaches in college football, especially in Power 5 football. So other than Tony Alford, who's older than him? Who's going to have the ability to say, hey, you're not thinking about this clearly? And I don't think that you have that on offense. And he stayed so out of it on defense that I just think that he's trusted, he's trust Jim Knowles implicitly. And I'm not sure that was rewarded.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I thought the defense in the end probably played well enough for Ohio State to win. The one killer was the 7-minute drive, but they also, it was 23 points and then the 7-yard touchdown drive that they gave up. Like, I think in most big games that should be good enough.
They played well enough to win. Kyle McCord played well enough to win, minus the first interception and the last interception. Like, in a game like this, in the margins, like, that is all it takes, though, is one drive, one interception. And again, Michigan didn't make those mistakes. Now, that goes back maybe to what has been an issue for Ohio State with discipline and other things. Ohio State only had one penalty on Saturday, right? That was the special teams penalty.
Yeah, illegal formation on a punt. Yeah.
So I guess I win my bold predictions crown because I said Ohio State would be penalized less than Michigan. I guess we'll hold on to that.
That's what we all care about.
Yeah. Yes. No, I don't know, man. Like, I totally get the perspective of fans asking, what's next? Where does this go? But I think that there are staff changes that need to be made and a decision by Ryan Day about which type of head coach he's going to be for the rest of his career, period. And those are not easy decisions, but they are decisions that have to be made, and they have to be made quickly because he's 44 years old. He's one of the winningest coaches in college football. If he was to duplicate the next 5 years that he's had over the first 5 years, he'd be the winningest coach in NCAA history over the first 10 years of his career. Like, better than Newt Rockne, better. Like, it's Kirby Smart is 1-4 against Alabama in his career. Nobody wants him fired because he's won national championships. He receives the benefit of not having to play Alabama every single year and have it decide the season. Ryan Day doesn't get that benefit of the doubt, and I understand it. He has to win these big games. And, I'm not here to say, put him on the hot seat. He knows he's on the hot seat. This is now a problem. This is now a trend. And it's a trend that he alone has the authority and power to fix. So what is he going to do? And that's the question. I look at Michigan staff, and I think that you have a staff full of coaches that are willing to do what they have to do to win the game. And I think sometimes Ohio State's coaching staff is willing to walk into a game and say, this is our plan and we're not changing it no matter what. And that is a concern to me. Larry Johnson, we talked about this 3 weeks ago. We thought Ohio State would mess around with some 5-man fronts against Minnesota to prepare for this game against Michigan. You don't think a 5-man front in the third and fourth quarter when Michigan decided to try to go just run heavy all the time would have made a difference? I think maybe you at least cut down those 4 yards of carry to 2.5 yards of carry, and you get off the field in 4 minutes instead of 7. Mm-hmm. I think that Larry Johnson's refusal to change the way he does things over the last 10 years of his career eventually catches up. And Urban Meyer was the greatest offensive mind in college football in 2007. Remember? And then 2017, the Buckeyes couldn't score without Ryan Day's bringing in a new style of offense. You have to keep evolving, and I just don't know that these guys are. Kudos to Tim Walton. His group played a great game again. Like, there are good things happening in this program, and really good young coaches and really good coaches making some steps in the right direction. But there are some areas where things have just stagnated, and it's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that stuff, right? I don't know we need to belabor it anymore here on this episode of the Daily. We'll see what happens with Ohio State this week. I think if you're someone who wants Ohio State to make the playoff, and I think you should, while that opportunity still exists. There's a couple games to keep an eye on this week. It seems more than likely it'll be a different New Year's Six bowl game for the Buckeyes, but we'll take that as it comes, and obviously we'll be here for you on the podcast all week leading up to whatever happens this weekend for Ohio State. We'll be at Roosters later on Monday for the live show. Come hang out if you want, or check it out here on the podcast channel. Kings of the North, everything you expect from us on a Monday and the rest of the week here on the podcast feeds. Until we talk to you again, that's Birmingham. I'm Bill. Thanks for listening.